Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to EPP's third set of annual results. I'm Hadley Dean, I'm the CEO of EPP. Today with us we have Jacek Baginski, who's our CFO, Michał Świerczynski, who is our board member and head of asset management. And we're fortunate also to have another board member with us today, Professor Marek Belka, who was the former Prime Minister of Poland and was the Governor of the National Bank of Poland until recently. So what we thought we would do is we'd just spend 10 minutes running through, and Professor Belka will give us a sort of an overview of what's happening in the global economy, how that's translating to Europe, and how that's translating to Poland. So, Professor Belka.
Good morning. I'll start with Polish economy rather than with global. I think what really happens in the Polish economy is of utmost importance for EPP. As a matter of fact, we are very much dependent as a company on the business, on the level of business activity, on consumption propensity, on how the people behave on the market, and that is why let me give you some overview of the Polish situation, and then I will turn briefly to the European economy because of two main reasons. Number one, Poland is part of European economy. It's not part of the Eurozone, but it's very tightly integrated into the European economy, especially to its northern part, which is good in this case, at least. So if what happens in the Eurozone weighs heavily on export performance, and this may indirectly, of course, affect the whole economy and the consumption. On the other side, the situation in the on the European financial markets is of some importance to us because it determines the availability and cost of capital. And EPP is, as you all know, naturally a company that needs to somehow finance its growth. So let me turn to the Polish economy. I understand that some of you, especially, well, most of you that follow EPP, follow also the Polish economy, so I'm not going into details. But let me just remind you that Poland is probably the certain outlier as far as Europe is concerned. The growth in Poland is much higher than in the rest of the European Union, including the new members, the relatively new members of the EU, the Central and Eastern European members of the EU. We have never suffered from a recession, which, well, makes us a real outlier in this sense. In the last 2 years, Polish economy has been growing at 5%, which is, I think, outstanding performance. But as an economist, I would even say, well, I doubt whether this is sustainable on the longer term, because if we look at what we call the potential rate of growth, it's slightly lower. It's maybe 4%. So if you keep growing at 5%, well, then some disequilibria, some tensions within the economy could accumulate. So we expect, as a matter of fact, a slowdown this year. Most forecasting institutions put it at 3.5%, around 3.5%. Now some of them are upgrading this to maybe close to 4%, which would be, as a matter of fact, optimal rate of growth of Poland. What are the drivers? What are the drivers of Polish economy? And I'm not going to talk about the whole 30 years period of post-transition period, but the last few years. Well, it's clearly consumption. Consumption is growing at the rate of 5–6%, so slightly higher than the rate of growth. And it is both internal consumption and external consumption. Exports are doing extremely well in Poland, well fed by very positive economic situation in the European Union recently. Well, but as an economist and as someone who is not so much concerned about the past, but more about the future, I'm asking myself whether this growth is sustainable, whether the internal structure of the economy is well balanced. And I'm happy to say it is. Poland is a very well balanced, very well equilibrated economy, both internally and externally. First, and most important, is that Poland as a society is not overly indebted. You know, one lesson that we have learned in the crisis of 2008 is that the aggregate volume of debt is what counts. So not only public debt, but also private debt. If we add up both, then we arrive at something like 110% of GDP. To compare, Western Europe is about 350%. China, well, an emerging economy, 250% and growing fast. So Poland is relatively, the pyramid of debt is relatively small and not very steep. What does it mean? That even if an external shock happens, then Poland has a chance, even in the very, very sharp recession around us, Poland still has a chance, as it was the case in 2009-10, to squeeze through, so to say, without a recession. Inflation is very low, 1.2% recently. Unemployment is one half of European average. Lower than 4%, 3.6% as far as I know recently. Trade balance is kept. As far as trades in goods is concerned, this is close to zero, but we have a very big trade surplus in services. So we are in a everything is relative in economics, but we are in a relatively safe position. Well, let me add also that the currency looks extremely stable. There was one blip up and down in the years 2006-2009, but if you look at the year 2000 and now, the exchange rate of zloty to euro is basically the same. In 2000, the nominal exchange rate was 4.1. Now it's 4.3. Well, so you can basically look, you know, without any concern about on the zloty. Okay. Now, as I already mentioned, we expect a certain slowdown. What we expected until very recently is that consumption will somehow slow down. Well, but here enters politics, and 2019 is a very important election year in Poland. So the parties are making promises, which is something that economists hate. But we have to look at it in a practical way, and what has been announced by the ruling party, by the ruling camp, by the government, will probably, will for sure extend this period of growth, of high growth for a year or two, which means that even if we expect a slowdown, we still do, the slowdown will be less pronounced than what we thought. It will rather be 4% rather than 3.5%, 3.3%. So for us as a company, this is good. Now, okay, of course, what is really important for the longer term situation in the economy is how the investment demand behaves, and it is fortunately accelerating, which we were concerned about a slow pace of investment in private sector over the last few years, but it is accelerating. Come on, if you work at full capacity, I mean, even if you are worried about the government, about the uncertainties stemming from the policy, finally you are starting to invest, and this is what is happening. Now, few sentences, few observations about the European economy. Well, the European economy behaved very well in the last 2 years. What does it mean? 2% plus growth for Europe is probably a growth above potential. It sounds probably strange for South Africans or for Poles, but established, ultra-rich economies grow not much more than 2%. And it happened in the last 2 years, basically alleviating tensions within the European economy. Well, the last two, the second half of 2018 was not so good. You may have noticed in the press that people started to be worried about whether the slowdown in the European economy is going to be sufficiently deep. Well, but the latest information we have is slightly reassuring. Number one, the latest PMI indexes, which show the sentiment of the managers, are improving. Second, the global trade, which Europe is so much dependent on, hasn't really slowed down following the tensions between the US and China. So there is much noise in the press, much noise in sort of political noise, but it hasn't really yet, at least, translated into, materialized into a real slowdown of trade, which probably improves the business climate in countries like Germany or Netherlands, and we are so much linked to them. And number three. Quite recently, the European Central Bank has noticed this and said, well, we are looking at this slowdown. We are not panicking, but we are concerned. And they hinted recently, which is extremely important, that the planned tightening of monetary policy will be at least delayed. What does it mean for us? That the situation on capital markets in Europe will probably ease out a bit. So it will be easier to get to financing in the European continent. Of course, there are problems. Well, after 2008, everybody is worried that a new crisis is coming. And I have recently read a report that 100% of CFOs of global companies predict a crisis this year. What is my reaction? If all of them predict a crisis, there will be no crisis. No, because they make provisions for them. I mean, what is really dangerous is a feeling of exuberance and then a crisis comes surprisingly. Of course, market economy, global economy is sensitive to different negative factors, and if they come together, if we have a confluence of factors like some problems within the Chinese economy, no-deal Brexit, which comes closer, some complication in the Italian banking system. If we add up, let's say, some additional or some problems in financing the exploding budget deficit in the US, if this all comes together, then we may have problems. But it's rather improbable that this happens, let's say, in concert, simultaneously. So, summing up, I think that we can be moderately optimistic about the European economy. It's not about being exuberant, no, but European economy is very much under control. I would not exaggerate the problems that Europe has now, for example, with Italy. Everybody was sort of shocked by the kind of government that showed up, that surfaced in Italy. However, if you look with cool eye on what has really happened, is that, number one, those bastards, has never uttered a word about Italy leaving the euro. It's all, not in Greece, not in France, not even Marine Le Pen, nobody. Well, there was a dispute between the Italian government and the European Commission about the size of budget deficit. I'm not telling who was right, who was wrong. But after some bellicose statements on both sides, they arrived at a very decent compromise. So probably the Italians will show how strong and how determined they are on anti-immigration policy. So I think that economy is put aside in this spats between European countries, but the problem will be, or not the problem, but the big discussion will be around how to contain or how to deal with immigration. But this is another issue. On this background, Polish economy is doing surprisingly well. Surprisingly because nothing can last forever. I mean, one day, a slowdown could come. If the economy slows down to 2%, we call it a recession in Poland. Okay, we were once close to 2%. Otherwise, we are growing at 4 or 5% a year. And basically, this is on how our company is sort of surfing the wave. That's my assessment of the macroeconomic environment in which EPP is going to function in the next 2-3 years. Thank you very much. Any questions?
No, I think it'll be later, Mark. Thank you. Professor Belka. Just to perhaps highlight one additional point. Professor Belka was talking about the policies that the Polish government have announced, and two of which, there's a whole raft of new, let's say, initiatives they're planning to help them win the next election, but two of which will be particularly relevant to EPP. Namely that many of you will be familiar with the 500+ policy, which is to accelerate sort of the growth in population. And that was from the second child onwards, and they've now extended that to the first child. So each family who has a child, one child, will be getting an additional 125 euros a month, which is material. And secondly, they've also announced this year that the pensioners in Poland will get a 13th pension. And this is minimum, yeah. And this is also relevant in the sense that 70% of the 500 plus and the pensions go directly into consumption. So it will have an impact. So let's now get into our annual results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the sort of company overview, talk to our portfolio, talk to the retail landscape, and then touch on the structural differences between Poland on e-commerce. Jacek will then run through our P&L and our balance sheet and our capital structure. Michał will then talk to our retail portfolio, talk about the Sunday trading, how his initiatives with Wojtek have been putting really the centre of our shopping centres at the centre of the community. And really, shopping centre directors, their job is to compete for people's time and money. And there's a lot of very interesting initiatives that have proved beneficial to EPP this year, so he'll run through those. He'll then touch on our largest assets and then talk to our two developments where there has been significant progress. And finally, I will touch on the outlook for 2019. So in terms of our retail portfolio, as you can see, we have 19 shopping centres. We have two developments, which are both in Warsaw. As you remember, Warsaw is the most underserved market. It was the most difficult market to get into. We are not developers, but we did take on limited development risk with these two assets, which Michał will talk to. We've increased the size of our portfolio to 684,000 square metres. That's an increase of 54%. And perhaps more importantly, we've now hit 100 million people come through our shopping centres per annum, and that's up by 32%. So how will our business look like in 2 years, in the summer of 2020? We'll own 28 shopping centres. These are not small shopping centres. The average size of them is just under 30,000 square metres, and that's an increase of 45%. And again, importantly, we will have 120 million people going through our shopping centres. So just to put that in context, every Pole will come into one of EPP's shopping centres 3 times a year. And more importantly, 40% of the population will be within a 30-minute drive time. So that is extremely important, given that nearly all the research is showing that 70% of online sales are click and collect, and this is what the retailers are looking for. So in terms of our financial, sort of some of our highlights, as you can see, we've increased our net operating income by 38% to 143 million euros. What is relevant here is of that 38%, 4.2% was like-for-like growth in NRI, and Michał will talk to that later. Our distributable earnings have increased by 26% to 96 million, and our dividend per share is within guidance at 11.60 €, and that's an increase of 6.7%. And on top of that, our NAV per share has also grown by 2%. I'm not going to go into the macro sort of fundamentals of Poland because I think Professor Belka has done a great job of that. But just in terms of the putting it into the context of retail spending, let's just touch on a few slides here. As you can see, the average monthly salary has been steadily growing over the last 8 years and is forecast to continue to grow. Unemployment rates are continuing to decline. They are half of what the EU average is. In terms of consumers spending, it's no surprise this continues to grow year on year, and there's 11% forecast for the next 3 years. But as Professor Belka was saying, well, where is this going to go? Well, if you look on this slide here, what you can see is that in the last 5 years, there's been a growth of 20% or 21% growth in salaries versus 11% in Germany, but we're coming from a much lower base. So the average salary in Poland is less than a third of what it is in Germany. It's at 1,000 euros versus 3,700 euros. So there's plenty of room to grow. How does the retail landscape look in Poland? Well, it's a very mature retail market. Michał can talk to that later. But what we're seeing, just like in Western Europe, is now retail supply is dropping. New extensions are pretty much most of the new supply, with smaller neighbourhood malls. And as you can see on the graph on the bottom right, also yields have been very stable now in Poland for the last certainly 5 years. So what retailers are excited about with Poland, what it gives them is access to a population of 40 million. It's a big market. And there are many new retailers each year that will come into the market. What Poland has structurally is a lack of high streets. So this is particularly relevant if you're a shopping centre owner. So if you compare Poland to the UK, in the UK the total GLA, retail GLA that is found on the high street is 60%. If you actually add in supermarkets, it's closer to 70%. And Poland has no high streets, and this is why 71% of all bricks and mortar spend is in shopping centres. So as the retail market developed in Poland, it went from really shopping in state-run department stores straight into shopping into modern Western shopping centres, which are light and bright and safe. And shopping centres have always been seen as a point of destination. If you come to Poland between October and March, you'll understand our weather is, we're not fortunate and blessed enough to have such good weather as you have here. But so people go with their families, it's a place where they meet, and we'll talk about the high F&B component of Polish shopping centres in a second. So this is it. So 70% of our retail spend occurs in shopping centres. Last time we were here, a number of you actually asked us to highlight this point in terms of, we obviously are at the top end of the like-for-like NOI increase. And we have developed something called the EPP University. And this is based, and the principle behind this is to increase our earnings per year, our rental income per year. So as many of you know who have been to Poland, we have this unique tool called the dashboard, which develops live all of the information from sales to footfall to every type of metric you can measure. Each day comes up into one dashboard. What this dashboard does is it allows us to see which tenants are performing well and which tenants are performing badly. And we believe this gives us about a 2 to 3 month advantage over our peers. So it's all well and good having this information, but if you don't have anything to do with it, it's not really going to be that helpful. So this is why we set up something called EPP University. And what it does is that it identifies problems early and prevents long-term voids. We've now trained more than 2,000 staff of our tenants, and over 200 companies have been trained, and this helps improve the performance of our shopping centres, and it leads to rental growth. So just forgive me, I'm just going to walk over here, but what you can see here is that in terms of sales density, both of these are within a 12-month period. What you can see with this tenant is our sales density increased from 800 euros a square metre within 12 months to 2,000 euros. More importantly, our OCRs have dropped from 42 down to just below 19%. So this gives us a very good way. And of course, the smaller tenants who don't have the access to training, don't have the web-based tools, are not so familiar with the latest lighting, with the latest stacking, the stocking of product, we really can help the tenants perform better in our shopping centres. And this is translating into some of our results. So let's now look at let's say, the retail landscape in the context of e-commerce. We hear a lot that what is happening in terms of e-commerce in America will happen in Poland. And of course, the retail environment with e-commerce is changing the retail landscape. But there are some fundamental and structural differences that I would like to highlight. Firstly, when you look at the offline sales growth versus online, what you can see is you're growing from 6 billion to 9 billion over a 5-year period, where bricks and mortar are growing from 106 billion to 127 billion. So 84% of the total online and offline growth is coming from bricks and mortar. So bricks and mortar in the next 3 years are set to grow by 4%. So the question is why? Well, firstly, there is a lack of high streets. After the Second World War, the majority of the high streets were destroyed, and simply put, the units that were built are 80 to 100 to 250 metres, so they can't accommodate the fashion offering. So typically they're sort of tourist trinket shops and they're cafes or they're small restaurants. They can't accommodate fashion. So, as I said, the retail just went straight from state department stores through to modern Western shopping centres. And this is structural. This cannot change. The high streets are set, unless, of course, there is another war, which we all hope there won't be. Customers prefer the touch and look and feel. So this, again, I think is structural. So a lot of people, so our portfolio in EPP, and we are not in any way different from Atrium and our other peers, is we have 16% of our total GLA is food and beverage and entertainment. In Western Europe, it's more like 11%. So for Poles, it was always about an experience. It was to go to meet their friends and family, have an ice cream, to have a burger, and now increasingly to have a sit-down meal. So in our new shopping centre in Macini, 25% of the GLA is food and beverage and entertainment. So this is, again, very different from the US and the UK. And this is another reason for a structural difference is, again, as I've said before, the research shows that 70% of online sales is click and collect. And let me just touch a little bit on why that is. So Poland is a very urban country. You're going from an agrarian society to an urban society. People have grown up living in the city centre. People want to live in the city centre. So the most successful residential projects are found downtown. It's not a suburban community. And what that means for deliveries for online is, of course, if you're delivering to a block of flats, it's much, much more difficult. It's a structural issue versus delivering to people's houses in America in the suburbs. And what we can see in the way the cities are developing, for example, on our Towarowa 22 site, is the city and us wanted a much more mixed-use development with residential, offices, hotels, as well as retail. And again, this is a structural issue that cannot change. So the retailer's answer to this, as we all know, is combining traditional retail with e-commerce and combine this with omni-channel. And as I've heard many times before, the reason why the retailers are promoting this is because if someone comes in and picks up on their way home from work, 50% of them will buy another product. And this is why it's crucial for EPP to own the dominant shopping centre in that location. So it needs to be centrally located with good public infrastructure and communication. And you can see this is a store in our asset in Pasaz Grunwaldzki in Wrocław, and here it is. It's a Pull and Bear, and you can see they're promoting their click and collect. So I'd like to hand over to Jacek to talk us through our financials.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Hadley. So let me start from the financial highlights. I will go through these numbers in detail in a moment, but just to summarize what Hadley already said was that, as you can see, the company increased its size and operation significantly, and NOI, as you can see, went up by 30%, which obviously translated into the growth of distributable earnings and DPS. And that mainly comes from the increased scale of the business. You can see the asset base went up by 27% comparing to 2017. And that translated also to the growth of NAV per share by 2.5%. So going to the details of the numbers, let me start from the NOI. You can see on that slide that NOI went up by 38.4 million euros comparing to 2017. There are three reasons for it. The first reason is that we consolidated the earnings delivered by the projects that we acquired in 2017 on the annual basis. As you remember, we acquired a number of assets in course of 2017, so we see the annualization of this of the income generated by these properties in 2018 numbers. On the top of that, we executed two acquisitions, actually three acquisitions, two of them of the retail assets in 2018. We acquired the first tranche of Metro assets in January. Then we acquired Marcelin shopping center in Poznań in the middle of 2018, and finally we also purchased one office building also in 2018. And the third element, Hadley was mentioning about it, which is super important for us, is that we also recorded a significant growth of net rental income on like-for-like basis. And this is 4.2%, and this is despite of the fact that 2018 was the first year where we faced the Sunday trade ban. There were, I think, 26 Sundays closed in 2018, whereas obviously in 2017 all the Sundays we could trade on every Sundays. So the three drivers helped to increase the size of the operations by 30%. As you can see, we managed to keep our G&A costs flat comparing to 2017, and that actually translated then in the growth of EBITDA by 45% comparing to 2017. So we are our EBITDA is at the level of 126 million euros. 2018 was also the year of refinancing on our side. So the company undertook a number of actions in order to extend its financing until 2022. That actually came with the costs. So on one side, obviously, we managed to extend significantly. I will show you this in a moment, our financing provided by the banks. But also, basically, this came with the cost. As you can see, the cost in regard to the margin went up from 2.14% to 2.33%. Also, the increase of the cost of the financing costs in total comes from the fact that we actually used the leverage in order to finance the acquisitions executed in 2018. In regard to the taxation went up also, but the reason for it is that obviously, as you know, we are part of the European Union for the last 20 years. So Poland is obliged to standardize its law, every law, as a matter of fact, to the European Union standards. And the government is undertaking actions in order to standardize the Polish law to what is in force in regard to the taxation in Europe. We, however, going forward, do not expect significant changes in regard to taxation in Poland that should impact our distribution. So looking at the very bottom, all in total, we managed to drive our DPS per share by 6.7% to 11.6 euros per share comparing to 2017. In regard to the balance sheet actually illustrates how we managed to increase the size of operations through the acquisitions and also through the revaluation of our assets. So as I said, in 2017 and 2018, we acquired a number of assets, which translated into growth of the investment property by 33%. Also in 2018, we advanced significantly in regard to the completion of our development project, which is Młociny. Michał will talk about Młociny in a moment. That actually translated into growth of the value or the valuation of this project by 20%. So that two drivers actually realized or help us to drive or increase the scale of the business significantly, where the asset base went up from 2 billion to 2.5 billion euros in 2018. In regard to the financing, we increased the leverage. I will talk about it in a moment. The leverage is at the level of 52%. The costs, I talked about it already. In regard to the hedging, we are financed through bilateral loans provided by the banks. Every time we raise the new financing, we hedge the interest rates provided by that loans for the period of financing, which is normally 5 years. So we are almost fully hedged. The unhedged 15% is basically attributed to some liquidity lines that we can draw and repay. So we decided not to hedge them. In regard to the financing, I was telling this in a moment. If you look at this graph on the right side, you can see that the company undertook a significant effort to extend its financing and push it to 2022 and 2023. That obviously came with some cost, but we think that this was worth to do so. Also on the top of that extension of the repayment debt or maturity of the loans, the company secured the liquidity. We entered into the loan agreement with one of the largest Canadian pension fund for 250 million euros, out of which 120 million euros is still available to the company, and that provides a security in regard to liquidity to the company. And the last element that I want to raise and talk about is the LTV. LTV is a concern. So we basically discussed among the board, and we decided actually to put more emphasis on the reduction of this LTV. We are undertaking a number of initiatives in order to do so. Two of them are the most important. First, obviously, is the recycling of the assets, and obviously also asset management activities that will allow us to increase the valuation of our assets. So thank you very much, and I would like to invite Michał to talk about the properties.
Good morning, everybody. 2018 was a really good and busy and exciting year for EPP and its operation teams. We have integrated the M1 portfolio. We have also integrated the Marcelin shopping center. We've been also very busy with the new competing situation that we had in Wrocław with Pasaz Grunwaldzki. And we also faced to face the new law limiting the trade on some of the Sundays, which I'll talk in detail later. Despite all that, we've been able to further grow the footfall and sales by 1%. 2018 was the third consecutive year where we had the growth on our portfolio. Polish Shopping Center Council just revealed their numbers as an average growth for the majority of the shopping centers in Poland. The footfall was negative, minus 3.7%, and turnover was down by 0.8%, which, and again, it's another year that proves that the portfolio of EPP is in the top league of the shopping centers with good locations and good tenanting positions. Our occupancy remained at high 100% level with a high WALT of 4.8, and this just shows that our properties are highly evaluated by our tenants. RTS remain at the same stable level of 10.3%, and that not only proves that we have a sustainable portfolio, but also that we still have a room to grow our rental income, which, and again, has been said many often, but I think it's important to mention, it led to rental growth by 4.2%. On the Sunday trading ban, I'm sure all interested, how did it affect the business? When I was here last year, we've been talking about certain assumptions and prediction. The main one was that we thought that in the long-term run, this will mainly lead to the shift of consumer habits, meaning people will further consume, but they're simply going to do it on other days. And I think that graph very clearly shows what has happened between March and December 2017. The law was implemented in March 2018 and will be fully implemented by the end of this year. And as you can see from a graph, we have literally recovered 100% of all the footfall that we lost on Sunday in the other days, and particularly Saturday, Monday, and Friday. This law is not only Poland specific. The retailers across Europe are facing this limitation in the majority of the countries. The food and beverage and entertainment and fitness, which is a big part of our business, is exempt from that law, which of course leads us to the fact that we have maintained our shopping centers open in these months. And what's interesting is that the food and beverage sales grew in Galaxy by 23% in last year versus 2017, despite the Sunday ban. Pasat Grunwaldzki plus 12%, and that's even despite the opening of Wrocławia, which I'll talk to this later, the competing scheme, and 6% in Galeria Echo. We have our extensive food and beverage offering. Now, it's not all about the numbers, it's about the predictions. We've been very proactive with dealing with the Sunday trade ban in 2018. Our main objective was to further start bringing people on Sundays to our shopping center, to cement our shopping centers with the local communities and to build loyalty among our customers. We have therefore launched what we call a shopping center social activation program. We have created a various list of very interesting educational sport events together with public institutions and local authorities. This had led to increase of the footfall just on Sundays between 19 and 120%. And that not only, like I said, supports the food and beverage sales and entertainment sales, but also build the loyalty. We are also linking this with pro-selling actions, which then brings the people back on the other weekdays to our shopping centers. On the asset highlights, as I mentioned, 2018 was a very good and busy year. It was also a very exciting year, and I think Pasaz Grunwaldzki is the best example of how exciting year that was. When we bought Pasaz Grunwaldzki in the beginning of 2016, we have set up a long-term asset management plan with this main objective to stand against the new upcoming competition from Unibuy, the Wrocławia project, and also to maintain the leading role in retail of Pasaz Grunwaldzki in the Wrocław market. What we have done in the meantime is we have achieved prolongation of 70 strategical leases. We have introduced 40 new brands to that project, and 10 of them in 2018. We have completely restructured the anchor tenant base and positioning of anchors among the shopping center to be equally attractive to our competitors. And parallel to this, we have launched our upgrading process, both inside the mall, including the lighting system, and also externally, including the facade and the positioning of the advertisement of the tenants. But also we have launched the upgrade of the food court, and I'll show you for pictures what has happened. But what does it actually mean in terms of all our actions? If you see here, our footfall remained basically stable. And that's, and again, despite the Sundays and despite the upcoming very strong and very powerful shopping center of Unibuy. Our sales went down by 7%. Please remember, we started off with a very high base in 2017, above 7%. But I think as figures that we got just recently, the footfall since October 2018 through November, December, and January, February this year, so the last 5 months, has been significantly growing between 2 to 7%. Our sales starting from November, December, and January were up between 7 to 9%. So these are the comparable months when Unibuy scheme has opened. And that basically what we're seeing from this is that whatever impact Wrocławia had on a shopping center is already stopped. And I think all our initiatives in terms of asset management and upgrading of the shopping center proves now to be right. And hopefully that shopping center will now be coming in a growing curve. And here you can see some of the images of the food court. Some of you have been on a tour, you have seen our food court. Like I said, it's been growing by 12%, but what we want to convert it to is to something that will become a destination, something that even Unibuy does not have. And you can see to the left, it's a typical, I would say, a boring sit-down environment to something which is more urban, more hippie, something that is more appealing to our younger audience that many is coming to our projects. We'll be enlarging the tenant base as well. Here you can see some of the other pictures. Just looking at that column, some of the works has already started. And for those of you who's going to join us in June, I'll be happy to present this live. Galeria Echo, the shopping center, has been now fully benefiting from its size and from its location. In December, we have noted a record high 1.1 million visitors just in December. That project is now 100% leased. And I have to say we have a very interesting queue of very quality tenants that would like to both enlarge the existing store but also come into that center. And if you look at the numbers, yes, the footfall maybe remains slightly below, but I think what's important to say, the turnover in 2017 was 9% up, and this year is 4.1% up. So it's a very stable and sustainable project. Galaxy. Galaxy is our #1 shopping center in the northern western part of Poland. And again, in 2016, we took a decision by extending that project by additional 15,000 square meters and adding 40 new tenants. And the main reason for this is really to be the #1 shopping center and stand against the competition of EC, which is a few kilometers down the road in our project. The extension was very successful. We opened in 2017. 2018 was all about bringing the attention of all the stretching customers to that project. And I think if you look at the numbers, footfall is up by 12% and turnover by 4.1%. That just proves that there was a proper decision and good asset management work. This year will be all about the food and beverage offering, similar to what we have done in Wrocław. And you can see we're already working on this. To the left, you can see a very successful offering, but yet then if you see it's not really appealing. We have old furniture, and what you see to the right, we want to make something more urban and again appealing to the younger audience. And we will be launching that project around mid-2018 to be fully completed, and Szczecin will actually become, Galaxy will become a modern shopping center with great new tenant mix, great fashion offering, modern facade and modern interior. On the acquisitions, many things has happened. As you know, last year we have acquired 12 shopping centers. 8 of them were M1 shopping centers and 4 power parks, and also the Marcelin shopping center, well, I'll talk into in a minute. The great thing about that portfolio is not only its established locations, its strong tenant base with Auchan, Obi, MediaMarkt, H&M, LPP, CCC. Maybe some of those names are not familiar to you, but this is the leading retailers in the Polish market. But also what this gives to us, the fact is that with that portfolio we'll have access to 40% of the Polish population with 30% higher disposable income within 30 minutes driving distance. And this puts us as a #1 retail landlord in Poland, which definitely will help us a lot with our relationship with our tenants. We've been also very busy with, like I said, with bringing those 4 projects to our portfolio and integrating them. But parallel to this, we've been also very busy by looking through the entire portfolio, looking at each individual site, trying to see where is the further potential for growth, for extensions. We have done quite hard work together with Metro, who's our master lessee. We have identified 5 projects that we would like to enlarge, further projects that we would like to restructure, and I think we have really good ideas. And currently what we're doing right now is talking to Metro how we would do it and when we would launch it, and hopefully when we meet here in September, we'll be happy to give you some further update on that project. But it's a definitely great portfolio with a lot of potential that could be unlocked in the coming years. And like I said, our latest acquisition was King Cross Marcelin. This is a very established shopping center in the western part of Poznań. due to its location, due to its positioning and its tenant base, and again, Auchan, MediaMarkt, LPP, H&M, and CCC. This project hasn't been, in the recent years, at all impacted by the two other competing schemes that were built in the eastern part of Poznań. This project has its own isolated catchment area. It's been now under our management since mid of 2018. We have a very good forward asset management plan, which is executing. The project is fully integrated. And now we're executing our asset management plan, which includes certain upgrade in the mall, and some of you have seen on the last tour, but also a significant extension of the project to really put a final stamp on being the top dominant project in the western part of Poznań. Now moving on to developments, Towarowa 22 is our, I would say, flagship development in Warsaw. Warsaw, as Hadley said, is a very important retail market to be because it's underserved market. There's not many projects that are coming up, and the retailers are really seeking for modern retail space. Now, what has happened in that project? As you remember, we've been telling you that in the end of 2017-18, we had local governmental elections, which could put a few months halt on the further discussions with the city about developing that project. The beneficial thing that happened is that the city board remained the same, and we continue on working with them and tossing certain ideas. This is a close to 5 hectare site located in the new CBD district, and you will see on your June tour for the people who's going to come how quickly that area is developed. And city also puts a lot of pressure on what kind of format that project's supposed to be. We've learned that they are more inclined to see there a mixed-use project, very nicely embedded into the public transportation system, but also into the current urban structure. So they would like to see streets inside of that shopping center, inside of that project. They would like to see a more mixed use, so more residential, more office, more hotel, and public spaces. And I think that we've worked hard enough to develop a project which is currently right now close to 230,000 square meters, with a big portion of retail of 110,000 square meters. That project will be now officially launched at MIPIM. MIPIM is one of the largest real estate conference in Europe, in Cannes, together in assistance with the city officials. So I'm sure once we get interesting data on this, we'll be happy to share it with you either through our PR, but also if you're going to join us in June, we'll present you a lot more about this project. We're planning to freeze and finish the concept design in 2019, and then move forward with developing in that project. Galeria Młociny is our project which is under construction. Some of you have seen it. We have a lot of materials to show you, but I think it's important just to remember why we have bought this project. First, because it is in Warsaw, and we spoke about how great that retail market is. Second, there was always a strong interest from both international and national retailers in that project, and we are currently at 96% leased and agreed terms. And I'm sure we're going to finish up by the opening with the remaining 4%. We have a very strong anchor base, which can very well compete with the other strong Unibuy schemes in Warsaw. But I think also we bought this because of its strategical location. And if I can bear you for a minute with this movie, here you can see the shopping center, the final touches on the facade, the final finishing works, and just cleanup, which is ahead of us. And here from that perspective, you can see the full size of that 84,000 square meter project, which would be one of the biggest in Warsaw. But what's most important, you can see our residential and catchment area actually at our doorstep. This is a very affluent northern part of Poland with a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of new housing developments coming up. To your left corner, you can see the downtown area. But also what's important is that to your right, you can see the public transportation hub, which consists of trams and bus end lines, and also the metro line. This will be the only shopping center in the left part of Poland, of Warsaw, connected to the subway. And here you can see the full dimension of the project. This public transportation hub generates 24 million people annually. It has its own big parking capacity of 1,000 parking places, which is now being extended by additional 1,000 parking places. And the city authority is talking to us about putting here another big parking area, which could be then directly linked with our shopping center. We're ready to open this in Q2 this year, and we have foreseen a big part of our June tour to come with you and spend some time in that shopping center and see the great potential of this project. Maybe a few other interesting elements. We'll just wait until the movie is seen. Is also its design. As you can see, we have a very modern contemporary design with a very intuitive allocation of the anchor tenants and of the vertical communication. But also, this is first level. And you can see on the first level, we have double height front facade, which of course brings more light, more appealing and more presence of the retailers. But also, it has a feeling that the first level is actually as a ground level. We've been talking about a food and beverage and about having a modern approach to this. This is part of the food and beverage called Halachutnik, which is more like a food hall with slow food offering. Here you can see some of the internal design that will be happening, and on top you can see the food court area, and below the double height front facade on the first level. And of course, more social activities. As like I said, the shopping center play a very vital leisure role among our communities. Thank you.
Great. So in terms of the outlook for 2019, we will continue to actively asset manage our portfolio. I think you can see from both what the actions that Wojtek and Michał are taking. We're really cementing our shopping centres at the heart of the communities, and this is vital going forward, and we'll continue to do that. But let's not forget, we also have to integrate 6 shopping centres into our portfolio. So again, the asset and property management teams will be busy with that. We'll continue with recycling our assets during 2019, and as we have spoken, we will be looking at our capital structure of the company actively, and we're actually running 3 parallel processes to do so. So in terms of EPP's core portfolio, it is expected to grow on an NOI base by 2 to 3% during 2019 on a like-for-like basis, which will deliver positive growth in DPS. A DPS forecast has not been provided, as this is dependent on the outcome and timing of these number of initiatives to reduce the company's loan-to-value ratio. However, with the expected growth in NOI, even after the impact of these initiatives currently underway to reduce the company's LTV, growth in DPS is expected flat or better. So this is the end of our annual results presentation, and what we will now do is go to questions. I think we'll have some from the webcast, and we're also open to questions from the floor. So Jacek and Michał, if you could come. Any questions, thoughts? Yes.
The second tranche of invoice payments, and obviously taking into account the capital structure and desire to bring down loan to value, how do you intend to pay for that? Is it issue of shares, sale of property? What's the plan?
As I said, we're working on, let's say, 3 to 4 initiatives at present, which we're fortunate enough to be able to do so. And as those initiatives come to fruition in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll be able to give more, let's say, guidance.
Sorry, please wait for the mic for the sake of the people online. Okay. Thanks for the presentation. Are you able to give us an update in terms of how the office portfolio has performed, as well as how you're doing in terms of disposing some of the assets, what type of yield you're getting on disposals?
Do you want to start?
Yeah,
with
so
the
just
performance of the office?
quickly on the performance. I think that we did a really good job on a majority of the projects in terms of signing and prolonging the leases. In Malta, we have integrated McKinsey fully in the project. We have prolonged majority of the project. We have increased the WALT. We're 100% leased. The main focus will be now on our Warsaw project, which is the Park Rozwoju. The great news is we have prolonged contracts with our two major tenants, which is Schneider and Ericsson, for another consecutive 7 years on the terms that we even were not expecting. And now it's a focus to lease up the remaining 6,000 square meters. We have a dedicated team for that project. We have quite interesting tenants in the pipeline. So other than that, that portfolio is performing, I would say, quite well. And we are planning to lease up Park Rozwoju fully this year.
So in terms of the asset sales, as you are aware, we've been in the late stages of discussions with a buyer at the end of last year, which I articulated. That investor, from a financing perspective, stepped back. We are not in a, we don't need to sell our assets. We're in a very fortunate position, and we will sell our assets as and when we're ready at book value. And we are in discussions with other parties, but we will sell our assets at the right price, and that time will be, we're confident we will sell some of our office assets in 2019.
Okay. Can I go for one more question?
Yes.
So, I mean, we've seen articles in terms of MediaMart looking to move into the shopping centre. So Tesco was the one, and I think Carrefour was the other one that was mentioned. On your M1 portfolio, when do those leases come up for renewal, the MediaMart specifically, and are there requests to downsize their space?
Yeah, so as you know, these assets are managed now by Metro, but of course we have some highlights what is happening there. MediaMarkt actually has agreed of all of their locations for the next 10 years. Whenever they wanted to downsize, they have downsized. So currently, MediaMarkt is operating in M1 on the sizes that they would want to be. So this is not an issue for M1. In our portfolio, we are discussing with them, I think, 2 downsizings, which is quite good because they unlock the space that we can use for other fashion retailers to enter the project, for example, in Marcelin.
Thank you.
Any questions from the webcast? No? Okay. So if there are no further questions, I think we can go and have a cup of coffee and have some breakfast. So many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.